Okay, so like, how do you introduce Craig Johnson, huh? I know, I have a couple minutes, but I thought, like, I'm Corby Skinner with The Writer's Voice, and I want to thank the Billings Public Library and this House of Books for putting on this great event. Craig, I realized I don't know how far back my computer goes, but I think the first reading we did with you was in 2004 for The Cold Dish.
Yeah, very first.
A long time ago. And judging from the crowd, I mean, maybe some of you have read some of these books. Some of you might know the TV series. This is such an honor. I kept thinking that Craig would be doing a reading from what I thought was his most recent book, Daughter of the Morning Star, which I think was one of the best books that he's written in a long time. I was just terrific.
You're just saying that because a certain portion of it took place here in Billings.
Okay, wait a minute. And how about a climactic scene at the Metro? Who would ever imagine? And there's one of it. So that was wonderful. And that book is also nominated for a High Plains Book Award in fiction this year, which is very exciting. So I don't need to tell you anything about Craig, except that we are so pleased to have him here. And let's go to hell and back. Welcome, Craig Johnson.
Thank you, Corby. Corby's an old friend, and you remember like that, because I mean now, it's kind of funny like that because Judy just made it. She made it in like that. There she is. So she was trailing along behind me, carrying my bags. I'm like, come on, we got to get there. Come on, we got to hurry here. And anyway, like that, you always remember the people who noticed you, early on. Because I mean, I remember an event that I did in Missoula where one guy showed up. It was a blizzard, and and they had told me, they said, well, we're going to do local author events, and I was like, we only have 3 bookstores in Wyoming, and they said, well, we'll do Montana too, and so I did those, but I drove, I literally drove my truck and everything, and it was a big blizzard, and this guy comes stumbling in. He'd come over from Helena. I'd actually come all the way over from Helena, to come and talk to me about the books, which was really kind of wonderful, And now, we get a little bit larger crowds which is very, very nice, So I want to thank all of you guys for being here tonight. Thank you so much. I don't quite know where to start. It's Hell and Back, which is the 18th book in the Walt Longmire mystery series, which sounds really strange coming out of my mouth, I got to tell you, because the first book, The Cold Dish, was just supposed to be a standalone book. That was it. It was going to be a standalone book. And when you read it, it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that's it. And Catherine Court, who was the president of Penguin at that point in time and the one who had purchased the book to publish, said to me, she sat me down there in New York, and she said, we really like these characters. We really like this environ. We like the voice of this character and all of that. We really think you should consider maybe doing some more of these, maybe doing this as a series is what we're thinking. And that's when I, with the knowledge of not even having had one book published yet, started arguing with the president of Penguin USA and going, yeah, no, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that'll work. But I got some other ideas I want to bounce off of you. And she was like, why don't you go back to your ranch and sit down and think about this? And so I did. And Judy was, there. And she says, you don't remember what it was like when you finished that book, do you? And I said, no. What are you talking about? And she goes, when you finished that book, you went into a deep-seated depression is what you did. And she said, it was like a mass death, with all of those characters being gone and everything. It was really hard on you. You moped around here at the ranch and it was really kind of hard to watch and everything. And I said, well, what do you think? And she goes, well, nobody else is going to write more of them. So if anybody is, maybe you should seriously think about it. And so that kind of started me off on the series and then the television show too, and the Longmire Days, the FEMA disaster that is Longmire Days. And the reason I call it a FEMA disaster is we just finished having it. We had a kind of a curtailed one because the only actor that we had there was Robert Taylor, but he's a big enough presence that he makes up the whole kit and caboodle. We're looking forward to next year where we hopefully can get all the actors all back together again. But we kind of had to walk before we could run. after COVID and all of that. But he was great. And came in. We had a marvelous time. But the reason I call it a FEMA disaster is because the first year that we did it, all of the grocery stores and all the restaurants ran out of food. All the ATMs and banks ran out of money. And then we got like one cell tower in Buffalo, and all of a sudden you have 20,000 extra cell phones, and everybody was walking around with their cell phones looking at the blue circle of death, looking at it like this. And I'm looking at them and going, yeah, now why doesn't Walt carry a cell phone? Now you know. But this is like the 18th book in the Walt Longmire series, and this one's a little bit different from some of the others and I gotta admit, I'm kind of proud of that, because I have a problem with series books that get formulaic. I mean, we've all started these series of books where you get going on them, and they seem an awful lot alike. They keep starting. The characters don't really change. They don't grow. The stories start repeating themselves. And it's all fine if that's what you want. But I don't think I could write that stuff. It would drive me crazy. And so the good news is I'm with this literary press, Viking Penguin, right? And all of my contracts for all of my books, do you know what they say? They say it must be a mystery and have Walt Longmire in it. That's it. That's all it says. And that leaves me a lot of leeway to get into trouble. It really does. And then the other individuals that are responsible for that freedom that I've got are you guys. I like to think that my readers are just a little bit smarter than the average bear, by golly. That you guys, will follow me out onto that thin ice. If I take the books and the characters and I take off in a different direction, you guys will just saddle up and go along with me. And I can't tell you how wonderful that is. Well, boy, I saddled up and went off on this one. I just want to go ahead and warn you now, But anyway, the title "Hell and Back," kind of refers to. I kind of have to drop back and punt here a little bit and tell you a little bit about Daughter of the Morning Star. For those of you who might not have read that book yet, or if you did read the book, this will give you a little bit of momentum in going into Hell and Back. It's actually it was about, I guess, 4 or 5 years ago. I was down in Hardin with my buddy Marcus Red Thunder, who you guys don't know, but you do know because he's the model for Henry in the books. And I was down there doing a library event in Hardin And we were in the entryway getting ready to go in. And in the entryway there was a bulletin board up on the wall And there was a missing persons poster on there, like a homemade, out of a computer, missing persons poster on the wall. And what had happened was the sun had come in through those glass doors and come all the way around that room, all during the course of the day, all the way around those walls, halfway across that bulletin board, halfway across that poster, and had removed half of that young woman's face. It was gone. It was just white on that one side. And half the information was gone, half the reward, all that stuff was just half gone. And it just was heart-wrenching to see that. And I thought to myself, what could be worse? What could possibly be worse than having someone that you care about, somebody you love, just disappear? I couldn't think of a thing that could be any worse than that. It got me interested. You got to remember, this is about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And so I started doing a little bit of research on this and found out some of the information about murdered and missing indigenous women and what a scourge it is, in Indian country these days. And so, I got the information together. I even contacted the Department of Justice, to get as many statistics and everything as I could. And so I always do Viking Penguin a favor and just kind of send them some information and say, this is kind of what I'm thinking about. And so I fired all that information off to them, and I said, this is what the book's probably going to be about. And they wrote me back and they said, you need to check your statistics. There's no way that there could be that many missing or murdered indigenous women in the United States. And I was like, oh yeah, there is. And so I had this cause. I had this idea and I had this cause. And I thought, this is what I'm going to write about. Well, the problem is you can't make a novel out of a cause. You got to have a little bit more than that to go on. And so I needed a storyline is what I needed. And so I needed a plot, for goodness sake. And so I had, Judy and I were down at the ranch on a Friday afternoon, and they get a phone call from Tiger Scalpcane, who is he's the athletic director for Lame Deer High School. And he calls me up and says, hey, he says, my daughter is the starting center, this evening, you got to come up and see the game, And so we jumped in the truck, drove up, and got there And the game that we saw, and I really enjoy saying this because for the first time in 23 days, you guys are going to know what this means. It was lodge grass versus lame deer. You know what that means, right? So for those of you who think the tribal wars are over, you need to go see a basketball game is what you need to go. I have never seen so many hip checks, elbows, bloody noses, sprained fingers, like that. And this was the girls' basketball team, all right? But they were just absolutely ferocious. I mean, the way that they played this game was awe-inspiring. I mean, not only was it like, tribal, pride, it was just also personal pride, and the fact that they were putting everything they had into these games and were just absolutely ferocious like that. And their eyes and their faces just glowed with the amount of energy that they were pouring into this. And so Judy and I walked out of there that evening, and I turned to Judy and I was like, that's the story. That's where this story is going to go. And so what happens is there's a young woman by the name of Jaya Long, okay, and she's an absolute phenom, an absolute basketball phenom. But she hasn't learned how to be a team player. She hasn't learned a lot of the things that you need to know to really, really be good. And so when Lola Long, the tribal police chief, calls up Walt and says, hey, how about you come up, like, because we have a little bit of a problem here. She starts receiving these death threats. And she says, I need some bodyguards to kind of look out for Jaya like that, and, also like that to maybe bring some attention, to this situation that's going on. And so Walt, comes up like that, but he also brings Henry along with him like that, because I've put Walt in some really dangerous situations over the last 17 years, but nothing as bad as a busload of teenage girls, all right, like that, so. I know, we have a granddaughter now, like that, so I know what that's all about, like that. So anyway, like that, it has to be taken seriously simply because Jaya had a sister, Jeannie, who went missing a year earlier and was just like that young woman on that poster, just disappeared, and nobody knows what happened to her. And so the book, Daughter of the Morning Star, has a beginning, has a middle, and has an end. We actually find out what happens, like that, what happened to Jeannie, like that, and we have some resolution with what's happening with Jaya. But there's another subcurrent. There's also another subtext that's going on in this book. Like that, there's something else going on in this situation, like that, and that's how I was introduced, to the mystical aspect of this book, was from my good friend Charles Whiteman. And Charles, like that, I was actually sitting on Charles's porch one day down in Lame Deer, like that, and his grandkids were out playing past the corral and up near the opening where a canyon was, like in the tree line, and it was getting dark, like, and they were out too far. They shouldn't have been out that far, and so he yells at them, like that, and yells at them to come back, like that, get their butts back over here where the house is. And I've got a working knowledge of Northern Cheyenne, like that, but I still miss up some words, like that, and so I was listening to him, and there was a term that he used that I didn't understand, and evo et se, heo me se, like that, and so I said, Charles, I got to ask you this question. I said, what did you just tell the kids? Because the kids came running back as soon as he said that. And I said, what's the story on that? What's that phrase? Like, and he goes, oh, that's just a boogeyman is what it is. Just a boogeyman to help, and the kids get out and far away. You tell them at the Evo, I'd say, hey, Mesa is going to come and get them. Okay, and he says, that'll make them, come back. Okay, so I said, oh, okay, all right. Okay, and so I left, came home, like, and I dug out my big, gigantic, Cheyenne dictionary, like, and which half the words are wrong, like, by the way, and so I flip it open, like, and I track down the two words, like, evo et se, wandering, heom et se, without, the wandering without, and I thought, ooh, that's a scary sounding thing now, isn't it? Like, and so I ran into Charles again, like maybe, I don't know, about a month later or something like that, and so I asked him, like, and I said, hey, Charles, I got to ask you, like, I said, have you ever thought about where what the origin is, for this evo et se, heo me se? Have you ever heard anything like that? And he goes, he says, since we had that conversation, I have been giving a lot of thought about that, because I knew the next time I saw you, you were going to ask me that question. And I said, well, what's the story on that? Like, and he goes, well, he says, he says, it's an old term. Like, and he says, I remember my great-grandfather telling me that when I would go too far and would yell at me that the evo et se, heo me se was going to come and get me. And he says, and he fought in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, for God's sakes. He says, so this term was like hundreds of years old, at least if not thousands of years old. And I said, well, have you ever thought about what it actually is or anything? And he goes, I have. He says, I don't know if this is what it is. He says, but this is what theory that I have on it. And I said, well, I'm dying to hear it. And he goes, well, he said, you got to remember that back in the day, he said, the human beings, like that, they did not have prisons, and they did not have police departments or anything like that. And he said if somebody did something, or if somebody was considered to be an individual that was not allowed to be in the presence of the other human beings, what we would do is we would banish them into the wilderness. And he said, what you got to remember is a couple hundred years ago, a couple thousand years ago, that was a death sentence is what that was. A human being out alone in the wilderness, you were going to die. There was just no two ways about it. And he said, I couldn't help but think that all of those souls, all those lost souls that had been banished from the companionship of their other human beings had a hunger for human beings and went out and gathered together to form the Evoetse Heomese that would come out and try and grab human souls like it. And I couldn't help but think, that, yeah, that's probably where the Evoetse Heomese came from. And I thought, yikes. Look at, and he's like, yeah, he says, one of the other names is called the Devourer of Souls. And I was like, yikes. Like, this just gets worse and worse, like, And so I thought about it, like, and I thought, well, my gosh, like, that's, just absolutely horrifying to think of. And, and of course, I always think of things, whenever I think of Walt like that, because, Walt, I don't know if he's a real believer in the mysticism and spirituality of the Northern Cheyenne and the Crow like that, but he's respectful of it. He's always respectful of it. The problem being that he's a detective. And so his life is basically evolved in empirical data. It's always going to be facts, nothing but the facts. Anything that's not a fact gets in the way of an investigation and has to be set aside like that. But all the way through Daughter of the Morning Star, he keeps hearing about this place that's involved with this Evoetse Heomese. He keeps hearing about all of this that might be involved with the missing girl, Jeannie, and all of this. And it's a place called Fort Pratt, Montana. And it's named for Richard Henry Pratt, like that, who was the designer of the boarding school system that was implemented, like it on the natives, like that, from about 1819 all the way till 1969. That's when the last boarding school closed. And I think his heart was in the right place. He's famous because he's famous for the phrase of kill the Indian, save the man. And the other word that he's famous for that did not exist until he created it is racist. Nobody knew about that word, never even thought about that word. And I think his heart was in the right place. I think that he wanted to give the natives an equal chance as far as the educational system and the laws were concerned in the mainstream of the country. The problem was with these boarding schools, basically what you were doing was taking children, plucking them away from their families, carrying them halfway across the country and dropping them off, shaving their heads, changing their clothes, putting uniforms on them, saying that they could not use their native language, could not have any contact with their native culture and all of this. And it made for some heartbreaking situations. We've just heard about all of these boarding schools up in the provincial boarding schools up in Canada, where they found all of these mass graves where these children had died at those boarding schools and were buried. And we've just started at doing a little bit of research at the new Department of the Interior report on the mass graves that have been discovered here in some of those boarding schools here in the U.S. And whenever I think about it, whenever I think about the visual imagery for me, what I always think of is as you come up and cut across, going towards Pryor, out on the Crow Reservation, and take the cutoff there at Rotten Grass Creek. Now, could you pick a better name than Rotten Grass Creek? I couldn't make that up, right? And that building used to be there. Do you guys remember? It's still there, to an extent. But the windows are all blown out, the doors are hanging off the edges, and the weeds are all growing up around it and all of this. But you remember there was a big storm that back in '86, around mid '80s, there was a really bad storm that came through that and blew through, and there were I remember Charles telling me that there were 3 or 4 people that actually got caught out and died of exposure from being in that area, and that tells you something. Rather than go into that school and save themselves, they stayed out and died. That's kind of telling in many ways. So anyway, Walt's out there looking for this town, Fort Pratt, Montana. And everybody in the book, Daughter of the Morning Star, keeps asking everybody, have you heard of this town, Fort Pratt, Montana? And they're all, yeah. And he's like, well, where is it? And they're like, oh, it's up near, over by, nobody knows where it is. They all have heard of it. They all think they know where it is, but when you pin them down, nobody knows where it is. And one of the most frightening moments, I think, in Daughter of the Morning Star is when Walt is down there by the river with Iron Bull, at the rancher, the Crow rancher. And he knows what Walt's going to do, and he turns and looks at him and says, good God, man, don't do it. Don't do it. That thing is out there. That thing is out there, and it's got a taste of you already, and it's just waiting for you up there. You should not go. Well, Walt's one of those guys. You know, he always jumps in with both feet where angels fear to tread. And so, with your permission, what I'd like to do is give you a little reading from Hellenbach. Are you guys game? All right. Okay, here we go. Let me get my safety glasses on. Hold on. So, the quote that I used actually for this book is actually from T.S. Eliot. Hell is oneself. Hell is alone. The other figures in it merely projections. There is nothing to escape from and nothing to escape to. One is always alone. This is from chapter 1. There was the sound of bells and then the silence. The kind of quiet that only comes with snow, capturing the sound waves of life and smothering them before they can cry out. I couldn't open my eyes, like something was weighing them down, so I brought my hand up to my face and brushed the snow away. My eyes worked now, so I tried to sit up, feeling something strike my chest, something small and metallic. A couple of somethings. Snow. A lot of it. Falling in static sheets. Fat flakes covered everything, silencing everything as they cascaded from the yellowish-black sky. I was lying in the middle of the street. I started to stand, but discovered that part of my sheepskin coat was frozen to the ground. Leaning over to one side, I noticed there were $2 silver in my lap, so I pulled a glove off with my teeth, picking up one of the coins that were old but looked remarkably unsullied. I glanced around again, couldn't see anybody else on the street, so I figured finders keepers. Scooping up the other one, I deposited them both into my pocket and then pulled the glove back on, tugging the tiny red beaded ends on the straps to snug it. I reached behind me and pulled my coat loose from the ice. I had at least been lying there long enough for it to freeze to the ground. Raising myself to a kneeling position, I felt something around my neck and pulled the material up to find a red scarf. It didn't particularly look like a man's scarf, silky with a fringed end, but with current weather conditions, I figured I didn't have a lot of options. Momentarily distracted, I saw a hump of snow beside me and reached over to find it was a pinch-front cowboy hat. I slapped it against my knee to knock it clean. Figuring it was also mine, I lifted it and tugged it over my head. It felt a little tight, but that was probably from being as frozen as it was. I stood the rest of the way and shook off the accumulated snow from my coat like a dog. I was at the top of the hill, which looked down a winding 2-lane road that dropped off into a small town about a mile away. Turning, I could see the top of the hill was covered with tiny crosses encircled by a wrought iron fence, where, a little further off, the corner of a stone building still stood, shedding rubble into the snow, a large lump of which was centered on some sort of platform. Above the gate, I saw an arch with the words, Fort Pratt Industrial Indian Boarding School. There was some movement at the apogee of the arch, and I watched as a great horned owl slowly swiveled his head from back to front to look at me, golden eyes shining like twin harvest moons. Howdy. He continued to observe me with all the patience in the world. Well, at least you didn't ask who. Sighing, I turned back towards the town, thinking I might get a little more conversation in that direction. Starting off down the 2-lane, I lumbered through the snow for a while, eventually passing a few buildings on the outskirts, a house or two, a library, and what looked to be an old Catholic church. There were buildings on either side of the road, the type of single-story storefronts seen in many small towns scattered across the Rocky Mountain West. Plastic wreaths hung from the dozen or so lampposts with red electric candles in each that flickered yellow and then, one at a time, slowly dimmed as I walked past. I couldn't really tell if it was night or day, with the skies colored the strange yellowish cast, and with the inclement weather. The surrounding distance was darkened into an ocean of obscurity. There were a few lit buildings, a 2-story grand vintage structure to my left, the Baker Hotel, and a movie theater down on the corner with a yellow and green neon marquee that read, Support your local sheriff. I had a mild headache and could smell something burning as if there were a forest fire not too far away. And I felt strangely detached for a guy who'd been lying out in the middle of the street. With a deep sigh, I took a few more steps, trudged towards the side of the road, amazed that I hadn't been scraped up by a snowplow. My back hurt, my limbs and head felt heavy. I must have been lying out there for quite some time. There were no cars or trucks parked in the street as far as I could see. I stepped onto the curb and sidewalk. There was a cafe at the other end of the block, and I decided to walk in that direction, even though it appeared to be leading west and out of town. Booths lined the glass front of the place, and the condensation inside of the windows promised warmth. A woman with strawberry blonde hair was wiping the counter, but no patrons, and I was worried that the tiny restaurant might be closed. I was relieved when I pushed on the wooden bar and the glass door swung open, a bell jingling above my head. Appearing to be in her early 30s, the blonde was stunningly beautiful. Dressed in a waitress uniform, she looked up at me, and there was something about her that stuck the words in my throat. I swallowed. "I'm sorry, but are you closed?" She looked up at the clock on the wall that advertised Red Lodge Soda Company. It was 8:17 p.m. Not for another 43 minutes, but I was thinking of closing for the blizzard and all. She looked back at me. "But can I help you?" I slipped off my hat and stared through the fogged windows back out onto the street. "Is it a blizzard?" She laughed, a silvery, melodic sound that made me turn back to her and smile. "Storm of the century. What, you don't read the papers?" "Not recently." I walked over and sat on the stool in front of her and placed my hat on the one next to me. "You know what? I could really use a cup of coffee." "You got it." She smiled, her hazel eyes sparkling. "The co-op says that they aren't going to get the power back on for 31 hours. I watched as she plucked the buffalo china mug from under the counter, walked to the coffee maker, and pulled the pot out by its plastic handle. I glanced around the well-lit space. "How come you still have electricity?" "Municipal generator system in the hill outside of town near the old boarding school. I guess back in the day the power went out all the time." She rested the mug on the counter. "Are you new around here?" "Yeah." I looked back in the street. "At least I think so." She laughed at the absurdity of my response. "You're not sure?" I pulled the red scarf from my neck, stuffing it into my hat and unbuttoning my heavy coat. "Well, to be honest, I just woke up out there in the road a moment ago." She stared at me. "Are you drunk?" "I don't think so. Drunk feels better than this." I pulled off my gloves, tucking them into my pocket, and sipped my coffee as she studied me. "You look familiar." I nodded and smiled. "You know, it's funny, but when I came in here, I was thinking the same thing about you." The coffee tasted hot, rich, and life-reaffirming. "What's your name?" "Martha." I sat there looking at her and thinking that of all the names in the world that I could have chosen for her, that one was perfect. "Just Martha?" She nodded, stepping back guardedly. "Just Martha, for now. It's a great name." I started to stick out my hand to shake hers, but then stopped. She glanced at my hand as I lowered it, but then went back to studying my face. "Is there something wrong?" I don't want to panic you or anything, but I can't seem to remember my own name." Her eyes sharpened and she folded her arms. "Your name is Walt Longmire." "So, do we know each other?" "No." "Then how do you know my name?" "It's on the liner of your hat." I reached over and picked the thing up, removing the scarf and reading the barely legible gold lettering on the sweatband. "This hat belongs to Walt Longmire, a gift from the grateful people of Absaroka County, Wyoming." I looked up at her. "Is this Absaroka County?" She moved closer, staring at me, pressing the palms of her hands against the edge of the counter. "Not even Wyoming. Welcome to Fort Pratt, Montana, Walt Longmire." That's all you get tonight. All right, there's a couple of things here that we need to take into consideration. The first one being that when Walt wakes up, he has two coins over his eyes. And those of you who know mythology know that when you're going across the river Styx to go into Hades, you have to pay the ferry $2, right? Also, from the Old West, before they had more modern techniques, the way you would keep somebody's eyes from flying open after they were dead, before rigor mortis set in, was you would take coins and put them over their eyes. What's the first thing Walt sees in Fort Pratt, Montana? Owl. The owls for the Northern Cheyenne are the messengers from the camp of the dead. He is also wearing a sheepskin coat that he has not worn since they cut it off of him back all the way in the very first book, The Cold Dish. And then who does he meet in that cafe? Who bears a a startling likability like that to his wife who died 5 years ago. And so here we are as Walt stumbles through this endless night, and it's always 8:17 p.m. And every number that comes up is 31. And could that possibly have something to do with the horrifying fire that took place in 1896, like that killed 31 young boys at this boarding school at approximately 8:17 p.m.? That's all you get. You get to figure the rest out for yourself, like that, and I hope you enjoy it. Evidently, like we're doing pretty well, like that, because this actually just landed at number 8 on the New York Times bestseller. What I normally do is open it up and let you guys ask some questions. You can ask me any kind of questions you want, but if you have read Hell is Empty, don't ask too detailed of questions and give away the plot for those who might not have read it just yet. So, anybody got any questions? Yes, sir.
Any chance that Walt Longmire and Joe Pickett are going to team up to solve crimes in Wyoming?
No, not going to happen. I don't really want to team up with anybody else because I don't work and play well with others. And the other thing is like you're basically saying that your world is coinciding with their world, and I don't want to do that. I like having the freedom of doing what it is that I do. Like I have to admit. Yes, ma'am.
817 is, this isn't given away because you did, is so specific.
Uh-huh.
Is that a number for you, like your birth date, or?
No, actually no. Look, it's just tied up with
You
Fort
just
Pratt.
came
That's
up
what it
with
is.
817?
Actually, it was really kind of strange though, like that, because I was doing an event. I'm trying to remember. I think it was in Scottsdale, and I had a guy come up to me like that, and he looked at me and goes, 817. Like that. I go, yeah. And he pulled out his watch, his pocket watch, and it was broken. And he handed it to me, and it was at 817. He said, my father's from Montana. Like that. This is his watch. It's broken. It's never worked. It won't move. It's stuck at 817. He says, that just creeped me totally out. And I was like, yeah, me too. So, do you guys know that, is it Laverne, like that has the hotel? The old 2-story hotel over here, like that when you head north, like that, is it Laverne or? Lavina, that's it, Lavina. That's the 2-story hotel. Tell them I used their hotel, would you? Let them know. Okay, so. Yeah, the Baker. Yeah, exactly. Even all the way through the first rewrite, it was the Baker. And then I thought, you know what? They might not want me to say they're haunted. You know? Anybody else? I get you guys are quiet tonight. Yes, ma'am.
Is Fort Pratt a real place, or is the tragedy there based on a real tragedy?
It actually is based off of a real tragedy, but there is, as far as I know, no Fort Pratt. But do you think there's a Fort Pratt? Do you know where it is? That was really kind of fun. Like, I actually took that idea from, we were doing a tour in France, and the books are like, it's amazing to me. Like, the books are bestsellers in France. Like, and there was one tour that we were going to, and there was this one town that was on the, on the list of the book stops we were going to make, and I tried to look it up on the maps, and it wasn't on any of the maps. And literally, when I started the tour, I started asking people because it was towards the end of the tour, and I started asking people about this town, and they were all like, "Yeah, I know where that is." And I'm like, "Well, where is it?" And they would be like, "Oh, it's south. It's actually towards." And nobody knew where it was. Like it was a really great little town, little medieval town, like that in the south of France. But nobody knew exactly where it was. Like, and I thought, that's creepy. So I decided I would use that. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I kept visualizing Fort Shaw.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Totally. It does give the indication that it's in that area. Yeah, because whenever they're like talking about where exactly it is, how far they have to go, like to get groceries or do anything like that. So yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Would you talk a little bit about your writing process? Because your books come out about one a year. From when you start, you storyboards, or just a little bit about
Honey, you've
your
been here with me for a half hour. What would lead you to believe there's any process? No, actually, I do. Again, I'm a big one for outlining. I feel like, because I tend to do what I refer to as socially responsible crime fiction. In essence, I've got a message, like a situation, an issue that I'm dealing with. I don't ever want to write those books those airport books where all you're doing is just piling up bodies to keep people like turning pages. I'll be honest with you, I hate that term, page turner. Why would I work on something for a full year just to get you to race through it? Like, I want to stumble you up. I want you to stop and go back and say, wait a minute, did they say what I think they said? Or did that description say what I think it meant? You know, all of those. I want to trip you up. I want you up until 2 o'clock in the morning reading that book. And I want you to get up in the morning and go, that son of a bitch. I want that. Like, I really do. And then as far as like, you know, the outlines and all that are concerned, yeah, I do great big outlines for every scene, every chapter, every book, everything like that, and because it kind of guards against a lot of the things that can happen to you when you're writing a book. One is pacing is a problem. Like I read a lot of young authors' works, and they have trouble with pacing. The problem with pacing, of course, is it's kind of like drywall. You know, it's not. It's exactly different from drywall. The more you do it, the better you get it. If you're not good at drywall, just pay somebody to do it. Like, and so anyway, like there's that. Like, and it also guards against writer's block. Because what's writer's block? Not knowing what happens next. Right? So if you got an outline, you always know what happens next. So I'm always telling students that's what you need to do, is to utilize that. And then sometimes people will ask me, they'll say, well, do you have great big storyboards where you have like the characters and their histories and the backstory and all this all written down? I'm like, no. I spend like 8 hours a day with these characters and in this world. And so I almost spend more time with them than I do with my family, to be honest with you. So I can usually keep them, pretty straight. My dad had a photographic memory. What a pain in the ass that was. Growing up with that. And I've got a photographic memory. It's just only partially developed. So it's getting worse as time goes by. Okay. But yeah, I take it very, very seriously and try and get down as much information as I can before I get started on a book. Okay. Before I even think about what that book's going to be. So, anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to compliment you on.
Now this is the way you start a question. If anybody was wondering, you gotta start it out like this. This is my sister, by the way.
From Arizona. Anyway, I want to thank you for putting in your last book about the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center for the donations. I thought that was very commendable.
Longmire Christmas, we were able to give $30,000 to the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's Resource Center down in Lame Deer, like that, which we're very, very, very proud of.
Yes,
Okay,
I'm
so-
sure glad. I'm a native Crow, 7th generation.
Well, thank you.
And that is so awesome. Yeah.
It's when you're going to have that much star power and that much energy and so many people coming from all over the world to do it, you always think to yourself, okay, well, yeah, we can make a profit, but we should do something with this
Yes,
money. We should
yes.
do something with it. So every year, all of the profit, like that from Longmire days, after we end up paying our bills, like that goes out, like that to different charities, like that. And this was a charity that I think was like essential to make a donation to.
Can I say something else?
Sure.
There's a lot of people that do not know there was 3 Crow reservations in Montana.
Mm.
Am I correct, sir?
I believe so, yes.
There's one out of Big Timber towards Livingston, Sortie, and the one down here.
Yeah.
And a lot of people from Montana do not know that.
Yeah.
I'm a native Crow, that's why I know.
Right.
And we did history. My great-grandfather, I like to brag because he came with John Bozeman from Nebraska through Pryor all the way up to Bozeman, but he homesteaded in Great Cliff. And then John Bozeman, he married a Crow, a full-blooded Crow from Livingston, around that area. Then he went with John Bozeman to get the sheep for 2 years. And they have a ranch that's sanctionized in a thing, oh yeah, man. Really, a lot of history. And I have another thing, I know I'm bragging, but my grandfather rode with Buffalo Bill Cody, he was a bronc rider. His name was Kid Case.
Okay.
Came out of Sheridan.
So there. Thank you.
I have it, get you for
Well,
Sheridan.
my pleasure. Yes, sir.
Greg, Did you plan on being a writer when you were 8 years old, or how did you get connected?
No, I wanted to be an astronaut, as I recall. And the odds against being either one were about the same, you know. And thank goodness I at least, found a way to accomplish one of those goals like that. But yeah, I came from a family of storytellers, is what it was. Came from a family of storytellers like that, and I was the worst one. And my mother was really, really, really good at it like that. And so I just thought, okay, well, if I can't tell them, maybe I could write them, and then maybe that's the way, I'll do this, like that, maybe get all these stories down, like that I want to get stories down, like that, because, you hear things and you think, generations pass, like that, and these stories just go away, and they're lost, and so I'm kind of desperate to make sure that, that happens, like that I get those things down.
Are you from Wyoming?
No, I'm scattered from all over. I had family, like that, here in Montana, like I had family in Hobbs, New Mexico, Lawrence, Kansas, like that, scattered all over. So, but I was always going to end up in the same place like that. I was always going to end up at U-Cross. 26. So, crown jewel of the UCLA area, U-Cross, Claremont, Lighter, and Arvada. Add them all together. Corby, I don't know if I want you to ask a question or not.
I was just going to say, these last couple of books have taken place in Montana. Is that a problem for a sheriff from Wyoming?
Doesn't seem to be. I got to admit, Charles was like the best about that, because I can't remember what we were talking about. We were talking about the state line between Wyoming and Montana, and I remember him going, I have hunted and fished that entire area, and I have never seen that line that they say is there. Yes, sir.
Is To Hell and Back going to be on audio?
Oh yeah, it's already out.
It's already out?
George already recorded it, and it came out the same day as the book did. So yeah, it's already out. So yeah. Yes, ma'am.
You're so big in France. Can you say Walt Longmire in French?
Oui, oui. They cripple us because they send us out with a translator, trying to avoid an international incident. Is what they're trying to do. But my wife actually, is actually, she's not bad. She actually had it in school like that, and so she's actually not bad. And when she's over there for a while, it comes back. And she starts getting more and more of it back like that. But yeah, no, I don't even try. I don't even make an attempt. Like that. So it's probably better that I don't. Yes, ma'am.
You said something earlier about teaching or talking to students. Do you talk to students or do you teach as well?
I do, off and on, off and on. When I get asked, I try to. One of the difficulties that I have is I'm a big believer that if you're going to try and help somebody with their writing, you need to read the writing. So what I won't do is fly in and do a writer's workshop where I just stand up here and spout off about writing for 45 minutes and then walk off and get a check and leave. To me, that's not very helpful. If you're going to help somebody with their writing, you need to read their writing. Well, the difficulty with that is if you have a class that has 30 people in it, you have to have the time to read all of that writing and go through it. And so it's become a little bit difficult for me to be able to take the time to do it. But every once in a while, I still do. I actually did a wonderful workshop down at the high school in Lodgegrass and had a wonderful time down there. And it got me into one of my favorite quotes where I got into trouble. It was about cultural appropriation. And I was talking to, there were the Crow kids there, in the high school, and we got the Q&A part, and this one kid says, "I got a question for you." You always like to hear it start like that, right? And so he says, "Why would you have a character like Henry Standing Bear? The strength and the intelligence and the perseverance, the stalwartness, who has all of the traits that are, the Crow tribe, and turn around and make him Northern Cheyenne." You guys work that out among yourselves. Anybody else? That it? Are we done? Oh, no. Yes, sir.
Okay, what did you do to, for lack of a better word, piss off our local book place here in town?
Which one?
Barnes and Noble.
Oh.
Because every day I get a feed from them.
Uh-huh.
Every time I look to see if your book is on there.
Uh-huh.
They haven't had your book on there yet for sale.
I don't know.
So what did you?
I don't know. Did you get it at Barnes and Noble? Okay, well, I guess
It wasn't
They're not promoting it, I guess. Like,
No.
Barnes and Noble's got going through a little bit of a problem right now.
I've
trying to
looked
figure
at
out who they are and what they
bestsellers
are.
coming out, and I've not seen
I
your
see.
book.
Yeah.
Craig, I can address that.
Sure, go right ahead. Corby is much more
When-
knowledgeable about the
Well,
book sales
when we
business.
started, we did every book, every reading at Barnes and Noble because it was the only bookstore, and there was a local person that really made sure books from Montana and Wyoming were in Barnes and Noble. They don't have that anymore. So Barnes and Noble is like a lot of places, they're not being sensitive to individual states and it's just, they don't have anybody there that
Yeah.
understands how many books they would sell if they had, Craig's
That was
books.
kind of one of the problems. I mean, I don't want to rag on Barnes and Noble. Like, one of the difficulties was, I remember when I was on tour and stuff, I would learn the names of all the managers of every bookstore I went into. Like, and I would learn the names of the managers of the Barnes and Nobles. Like, I'd come back the next year, they were gone. Inevitably, they were gone the next year. And so, for me, I'm a big proponent for independent bookstores. And so, the one back here in the back of this house is a powerhouse, as far as I'm concerned. And so, in many ways, it's kind of like Budweiser and Coors. They don't need my help like that Bud Rainier does. And so Barnes & Noble and Amazon don't need my help. And an awful lot of the time, they don't really care about me. I'm a cowboy author from a town of 25, and they don't care about me like this house of books cares about me, okay? And I care about them. And so it's kind of a nice relationship to have. So, somebody else? Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I've read all of your books.
Thank you.
I love Walt.
This is the second best way to start a family. And this is my other sister.
And I just want to thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you. Hey, I consider that one benefit. Billings is our big town, all right? Like, if we fly anywhere, we go to Billings. If we go to get groceries, we go to Billings. So inevitably, we're in Billings an awful lot. And you can tell. I mean, when you read Daughter of the Morning Star like that, there's a ton that takes place here in Billings like that. And so, it's I consider this home territory. This is important to me. So it's never going to disappear from my books. I can guarantee.
And we know you're coming.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. The gentleman back here has a question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was going to be any more short story books.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, we're actually approaching the point in time. I think probably about a year or so, I will have enough short stories again, because I don't know if you guys know it or not, but if you go on my website, CraigAllenJohnson.com, shameless plug. If you go there and you sign up for my newsletter, the Post-it, it's like Ruby's Post-its that she puts on Walt's door facing and everything. I send you an email like once every 2 or 3 months. So I'm not overfilling your inbox. But the one thing I also do is I also send you a Christmas story on Christmas morning. A Longmire Christmas story. And I've been doing that for, I guess, 15 years or so, or something like, maybe even longer, like that, I actually know it's been closer to 17 years, like that. So, I mean, if the first book came out, the first one was Old Indian Trick, which was the one that was like in between The Cold Dish and Death Without Company. That was between the first and second book. So I guess it's been like 17 years I've been doing them like it. And so I've got I've got almost another dozen ready to go. Okay. And so there will be another collection of them like that I'll be using. For those of you who don't know, this year's was called Warms You Twice. And it was about a guy who was having his firewood stolen. And so what he started doing was he would drill out the ends of the firewood and put like an eighth of a stick of dynamite. And then when people stole his firewood, it would blow up in their chimney. And of course, I couldn't get the story to work with Walt because he's just not ruthless enough to do that. And I thought, Lucian. It was based off my father, the one with the photographic memory. And so, while he's questioning the guy about the firewood, he's taking pieces of firewood and throwing them in the fire and looking at him. After a certain while, the guy's like, whoa, wait a minute, you got something you want to tell me? So anyway, do you want to hear about the next book? Yeah. We can finish off by you guys hearing about the next book. The next book, it's got about 5 different titles, so I haven't settled on one just yet. It's the first time that's ever happened. Usually I've got a title like that, but this one has a couple of really good ones like that, so we'll see who wins the race like that. But what happens is Walt gets involved with search and rescue, goes up on the mountain in the Bighorns, and there's a woman. She's buried her car in the snow. She got off the main road, buries the car like that, and she calls in 911, scared, it's getting cold, it's getting dark, they gotta find her. So search and rescue goes up, and they think she's in this one section, right? And Walt's looking at the quad sheets, and he's thinking to himself, nobody gets lost going uphill. Like that, she would have gone downhill and followed Rock Creek and gone this way. And so he goes in that direction, and he finds her. And so he finds her, like, and so his radio, they're out in the middle of nowhere, and it won't work. So he has to borrow her cell phone and go up on a rock outcropping, like that, and get enough, signal where he can call in and say, we're coming out on this one trailhead, like that, we'll be out, like that, here in about 30 minutes, like that. And he's looking around when he finishes the phone call, and he's looking around and he recognizes the spot where he is because it's his grandfather's elk camp. He remembers. And he also remembers a conversation that he and his father had years later, like that. And what it was his father asked him, he said, have I ever told you about the first time I saw a man die? And Walt says, no, sir, you didn't. Okay, so he begins to tell him the story. The story's about this gentleman by the name of Bill Sutherland. World War II veteran, like that, fought in Battle of the Ardennes, like that, Battle of the Bulge. Came back after World War II, like that, wanted to just go out and go on a hunting trip, go get an elk, like that, and clear his head after the war, like that. And so, he asks Walt's grandfather and father if he can come up and hunt, at their elk camp. And they say, absolutely, come on ahead. He's shot. He's shot. And they don't know if it was an accident or if it was on purpose. They do know that he was the accountant for the state treasury of Wyoming, which brings into question why it is somebody might have wanted to kill him. But the thing is they can't track the ballistics because the weapon that was used was a prototype weapon at that point in time. Like, nobody was carrying it. Nobody was carrying that weapon in the elk camp. So it had to be some stranger, somebody they didn't know, right? And so Walt's thinking about all these things, and he's listening, and the dog is digging down underneath the rocks down here. He looks down and he says, get away from there before a badger or marmot comes out and takes your nose off. The dog raises its head and it's got a leather strap in its mouth. Could be a piece of horse tack. Could be a rifle sling. Walt goes over the rocks, climbs down, reaches his arm down in there and pulls out a Weatherby 300 H&H Magnum. It was a prototype weapon at that point in time. It has no serial numbers on it. It's a complete prototype weapon. And I like to think that Walt is one of the most ecumenical detectives on the face of the earth. He is a firm believer in innocent until proven guilty. Until we find out this weapon belonged to Lloyd Longmire, Walt's grandfather. That's all you get tonight. Thank you, guys.